My daughter called me from a hospital waiting room on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I almost didn't pick up. I was elbow deep in soil, replanting the hydrangeas along the back fence, and my phone was sitting on the porch railing 20 feet away. I heard it ring twice, stopped, heard it ring a third time, and something in my chest told me to go get it. I pulled off my gardening gloves as I walked. "Mom," that was all she said, just that one word, but the way she said it, the way the air left her voice before she could say anything else. I already knew. Mothers know. We always know before we're told. "Where are you, sweetheart?" "St. Mercy." "The waiting room." "Owen has a fever, and I couldn't. I didn't know who else." She stopped. I could hear her breathing, small and careful, the way she used to breathe when she was 8 years old and trying not to cry in front of other people. "Which entrance?" "The pediatric one. Off Crestview. I'm on my way." I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't ask what happened, or why she was alone, or where her husband was. I went inside, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, picked up my keys, and left. I had a feeling the explanation would take longer than the drive. I found her in the corner of the waiting room, sitting in one of those hard plastic chairs with the armrests that are too high for anyone to actually rest their arms on. My grandson Owen was asleep across her lap, his head on her coat, his small face flushed and damp. My daughter had one hand pressed gently to his back. With the other hand, she was clutching her phone in her lap, not looking at it, just staring at the floor. She was wearing the same jeans she'd had on the day before. I noticed that first. She looked up when she heard my shoes on the linoleum. "Mum," she said again, and this time it broke open. I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders and didn't say a word. Owen stirred a little, then settled. A woman across the room pretended to look at a magazine. A television mounted to the wall was playing something with the volume too low to hear. We sat like that for a few minutes. Then my daughter said, "She took everything." I let the silence stay for a moment before I asked, "Tell me." "Her name is Audrey. She is 36 years old. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that fills a room, and she has spent the last 8 years building a life in a house in Sycamore Hills with a man I will call her husband, because that is what he is, and their son Owen, who was 5 years old and currently sleeping through the worst week of his life. Her mother-in-law's name is Patricia. I will not use a polite word for what Patricia did. Polite words are for people who have earned them. Audrey had been working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized architecture firm downtown, a job she'd gotten entirely on her own, before she ever met my son-in-law, before she ever set foot in that family. She had a good reputation. She was trusted. She'd worked there for 6 years. Patricia had a different job. Patricia sat on the board of a private property investment group, the kind of small, quiet outfit that owns more than it talks about. She had been doing this for the better part of 20 years. She knew people. She was careful about which people she knew, and more careful about what those people owed her. 8 months ago, Audrey's firm took on a new client, a commercial real estate development project on the east side of the city. Nothing unusual. Audrey was assigned as one of the coordinators. What Audrey didn't know, what nobody told her, was that the company behind that development had a silent consulting arrangement with Patricia's investment group. What Patricia knew, and what she had apparently known for months before Audrey was assigned to that project, was exactly who was involved and exactly how close that would put my daughter to information that Patricia considered hers to control. I'm not going to pretend I understood all of it that first day. Audrey explained it to me in pieces over weeks. But the short version is this. Patricia decided that Audrey knowing certain things was a risk. Not a real risk, not a legal risk, a control risk, the kind of risk that only matters to people who have built their entire sense of self on being the one who decides what happens next. So Patricia made a phone call. Audrey found out on a Thursday morning. 6 weeks before I drove to that hospital, she walked into her office, set her coffee on her desk, and was asked by her manager to come into the conference room. Her manager, who had worked with her for 4 years, who had given her a strong review 8 months before, who, when Audrey walked into the conference room, could not look her in the eye. There were 2 other people in the room. One was from HR. One was someone Audrey had never seen before, who turned out to be an attorney. They told her that questions had been raised about her conduct on the East Side Development Project. They said there were concerns about a breach of confidentiality. They slid a folder across the table. Inside the folder were emails. Audrey's name was on them. Her work email address, her signature block. 3 emails sent over 2 months to an outside address she did not recognize, containing excerpts from internal project documentation. She had never written those emails. She had never sent them. But there they were. She asked to see the originals. They said they had only been provided copies. She asked who had provided them. The attorney said they were not at liberty to say. She was placed on administrative leave effective immediately. She was asked to surrender her badge and her laptop before leaving the building. She drove home in the middle of a Thursday morning in her work clothes with nothing in her hands. She sat in her driveway for 40 minutes before she could go inside. She didn't tell me right away. That is the part that hurt me most, if I'm being honest. Not what Patricia did, not even what came after. The fact that my daughter sat with this for 6 weeks before she called me from a hospital waiting room, because she had spent those 6 weeks trying to hold everything together by herself, the way I raised her to try, and the way I wish I hadn't made her feel she had to. She had told her husband the same night. She had shown him the folder, explained what she'd been told, walked him through every detail. He had listened. He had held her hand. He had held her hand. He had said he believed her. And then his mother had called, and something had shifted. I don't know exactly what Patricia said to her son. I wasn't in the room. But I know what the weeks after looked like, because Audrey told me. The careful silences, the questions that were really accusations, dressed up just enough to allow for deniability, the way he had started coming home late and leaving early. The way he had stopped asking how she was doing and started asking gently whether she'd thought about what her next steps were. He had not called a lawyer. He had not asked to see the original emails. He had not called the firm and demanded answers. He had done nothing because doing nothing was a choice his mother had made available to him, and it required the least amount of confrontation with the person he had never in 38 years learned to confront. 2 weeks before the hospital, he told Audrey he thought it might be better if she stayed somewhere else for a while. She had asked him what that meant. He had not answered clearly. He had said things like space and pressure and everyone needs to take a breath. He had not said, "I'm asking you to leave," but he had not said, "I'm asking you to stay," either, and Audrey had learned by then what his silences meant. She packed a bag for herself and a bag for Owen. She took his car seat and his stuffed rabbit and his allergy medication and the folder from the conference room and nothing else. She drove to a friend's apartment on the other side of town, and she stayed there, and she did not call me, because she was still trying to hold it together. And then Owen developed a fever of 103 on a Tuesday morning, and the friend's apartment was 40 minutes from the nearest pediatric urgent care on her side of town, and at some point in the waiting room, sitting in that plastic chair with her son asleep across her lap, Audrey stopped trying to hold it together and called me. I listened to all of it. I sat in that waiting room while a nurse eventually called Owen's name, and we carried him back and sat with him while a doctor checked him over and told us it was an ear infection. Bacterial, here's the prescription. He'll feel better in 48 hours. I listened to everything while Owen slept against my shoulder on the drive back to my house. I made up the guest room with the good quilts. I put Owen in the small bed against the window that his mother had slept in when she was his age. I made soup, the kind my mother used to make, the kind that takes the better part of an afternoon and fills the whole house. And after Owen was asleep, I sat across the kitchen table from my daughter, and I listened to the rest of it. I did not raise my voice. I did not say things I would have to walk back later. I handed her the soup, and I listened. When she was done, she looked at me with the face of a woman who had been strong for too long and was afraid to stop now, and she said, "I don't know what to do. I don't know where to do. I don't know where to start." I said, "I do. I've had a long time to think about what happened, long enough that the anger has settled into something quieter. Not forgiveness. I'm not going to dress this up as a redemption story for the woman who did this to my daughter, but something like understanding of how these things work and why they always eventually come undone. Patricia spent 20 years building something she thought was permanent, a network of favors and leverage and carefully placed phone calls. She had learned that if you move quietly and move early, most people won't even know what happened to them until it's already done. And for a long time, that had worked for her. People had lost things because of Patricia. Jobs, contracts, opportunities, and most of them never traced it back. They just picked themselves up and moved on, the way people do when they don't know who to be angry at. The mistake Patricia made was a simple one. She forgot to ask who my daughter's mother was. I don't say that to sound impressive. I say it because it's the only way I know how to explain what happened next. Patricia had spent so much time calculating other people's weaknesses that she had stopped accounting for other people's strengths. She saw my daughter as an isolated variable, a daughter-in-law with a decent job and no particular allies, married into a family that Patricia controlled. She did not see me. She had no reason to. That is the thing about quiet people. The ones who don't announce themselves, the ones who have been building something steadily for decades, without ever needing anyone to watch. Patricia knew how to read a room. She just hadn't been in the same room as me. What I keep coming back to, though, is Audrey, not Patricia. Not the contracts or the phone calls or any of it. I keep coming back to my daughter sitting in that waiting room with her son asleep across her lap, holding it together because she had decided somewhere along the way that needing help was something to be ashamed of. And I think about where she learned that. I think about the version of strength I modeled for her when she was growing up. Capable, self-sufficient, handle it yourself. And I wonder how much of her silence those 6 weeks was my doing without meaning it to be. Strength is not the same thing as isolation. I know that now better than I did at 62. The strongest thing Audrey did in this whole story was not surviving those 6 weeks alone. It was picking up the phone, and Owen, my grandson, 5 years old, sick with an ear infection, sleeping through the worst week of his young life without knowing it was the worst week. He is the reason any of this matters. Children absorb more than we think. They don't need the details. They need to watch the adults around them and learn what it looks like when things go wrong and the people who love you show up anyway. I hope that's what he took from it. I hope when he's older, what he remembers is not the waiting room or the one bag or his mother's face that Tuesday. I hope what he remembers is that his grandmother came, and they had soup, and everything was going to be all right. Because it was. It took time, and there were hard months, and my son-in-law had a great deal to reckon with about the choices he made and the ones he didn't. But it was all right. What I want to say to anyone watching this who's carrying something they haven't told anyone yet, the weight of it does not make you stronger. Carrying it alone just makes it heavier. There is no prize for suffering quietly. There is only the waiting room and the phone call you haven't made yet, and someone on the other end of the line who would drop everything. Make the call.